Okay,
Okay, here we go. It's Monday. Hello, everybody.
good morning. How's everyone today? I
Yeah,
hope good.
yeah. Um, Things just don't seem to be getting any easier in our country, but um, we keep on staying close to Jesus by learning his stories and telling them and trying to understand them, communicate them. So today's story that we have is from the Gospel of John. Um, Story for this coming Sunday. Tom will tell it to us.
Okay, so we got to keep his stuff in the big picture. So this is a bigger picture. Jesus decided to go to Galilee, and he found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Peter and Andrew. And he found Nathanael. And he said to him, "Hey, we found him of whom Moses in the law wrote, and all the prophets also, Jesus, son of Joseph, from Nazareth." And Nathanael said, "Yeah, right. Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And Philip said, "Come and see." Well, as he was going, and as Jesus saw him coming toward him, he said, "Hey, look, truly an Israelite in whom there is no guile." And Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" And Jesus said to him, "Well, before Philip called you, when you were standing under the fig tree, I saw you." And Nathanael said, "Oh, Rabbi, you're the Son of God. You're the King of Israel." And Jesus said to him, "Because I told you I saw you under a fig tree, have you believed? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly I tell you, you will see the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man."
Wow. All right, thank you. I got kind of caught up in that. Thank you. Image of the angels and the angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. All right, back to the beginning of the story. I was a little taken aback when you said that Peter and Andrew came from Bethsaida, because I thought they came from Capernaum, because in Mark, they go to the synagogue of Capernaum, and then they go to Peter's house. So what's going on here?
Well, I think what's going on is that we need to remember that John was writing some 60 years after Jesus. There were no records. And so the life of Jesus had generated all these storytelling traditions that were passed on for years and years before anything was written down. And so there may have been some things, that were written down during that time, but they didn't have any records. And so they were basing what they were doing on oral traditions that had developed over the course of those years. And there were different ones. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke had different oral traditions that they based their stories on. Mark may not have had have heard birth stories, just like John didn't hear birth stories. But we don't know. We do know that there were different traditions that developed, and that Peter and Andrew were associated with Capernaum and with Bethsaida.
Bethsaida. Yeah, so maybe the people in Bethsaida wanted to, have their town lifted up.
Yeah.
A little competition between
Part of the
Capernaum.
ongoing competition.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's
if
possible.
you were a person who took the Bible, who wanted to argue that everything was literally true and there were no, whatever, how would you reconcile these two different locations?
Well, I would say it's on the basis of the recognition of the historical context out of which these stories were developed. I imagine that people who are trying to take everything literally as a historical fact would say that they moved, that they had lived in both places. Yeah. And so
is that likely? Is that likely, Tom?
Well,
social context?
Yeah, not really.
Yeah.
But people were pretty well tied to the specific places. I mean, they did move. There was quite a bit of moving that was happening, people moving into the diaspora and leaving Palestine.
Yeah.
So it's not out of the question.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, these stories are about the beginning of Jesus' ministry. They're located at the same time. So there wouldn't have been 2 years in between the stories about Capernaum and Bethsaida.
Yeah.
So I expect it's a reflection of the oral traditions.
Yeah. Well, there are other differences between John and the other Gospels. What are the connections?
Yeah, well, that's interesting too. John, Philip says, Jesus, son of Joseph. Well, in Matthew, the stories of Joseph are, at the core of the birth narrative. And the angels of God ascending and descending, the dove was coming down out of heaven in the baptism story and came down and rested on Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
A similar kind of description.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be that John had heard these stories, but decided not to, that he wanted to focus on this distinctive story that he had,
right,
that is
Nathanael.
Not present in any. Yeah.
So Nathanael. So
Mark or Luke.
So what do you make of the story of Nathanael? What does it say about Jesus? Let me put it that way.
What it says about Jesus is that Jesus had friends, and that he had made friends with the young men in around the Sea of Galilee and had called them. So this is the major story that we have about Philip and about Nathanael. So these are reflections of the affection and I don't know, good friend relationships that existed between Jesus and these guys who he called to follow him and who followed him throughout his life and then became his heralds, his storytellers, right, who told the stories of Jesus all over the world.
Yeah. What does it mean that Jesus said, "Oh, an Israelite in whom there is no guile"? What is that about?
Well, it's an allusion to, for people who knew the stories of Jacob, he was characterized as one who tricked his brother. So his father and Esau both say, this trickster, he tricked me out of my birthright and my inheritance. And his father agrees and describes him that way. After his wrestling with the angel, he was no longer called Jacob. Something happened that really changed him. Mm-hmm. After that, he was called Israel. And so an Israelite in whom there is no guile was then also a kind of Jewish joke. that the descendants of Jacob were known for being, carrying on the traditions of guile and trickery.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so Nathanael was distinctive among the descendants of Jacob. That he didn't have any
Didn't have
guile.
any guile.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a compliment.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
oh,
Well, it's he responds by saying, "How did you know me?" So that's kind of interesting. It's almost like, because there was nothing about his name yet. It was almost like Jesus knew he would, knew his character. I guess that's what
yeah,
I'm trying to say. That
yeah.
sense of knowing.
And he had never known him. He had never met him. Is clearly implied.
Right.
So Nathanael says, "Well, how did you know that I'm, a kind of upfront guy?"
Yeah.
And Jesus says, because before Philip spoke to you, I saw you under the fig tree. It just, Nathanael is blown away.
Yeah.
He recognizes this guy had supernatural knowledge.
Right.
And
So that gets me to another question. He calls him the Son of God, and that's one of several titles that Jesus is given. What are these is Son of Man, and is King of Israel also in this story?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what?
Yeah, he says, "You're the Son of God. You're the King of Israel." And so he names him as the Messiah, as a Messiah, as one who was anointed like the kings of Israel.
Okay.
But first of all, he calls him the Son of God. Well, who was called Son of God? Well, Julius Caesar was called the Son of God.
Wow.
And Augustus, and so on. So the Romans would name their emperors Son of God. This is Nathanael naming Jesus Son of God.
Wow.
And King of Israel. They are exalted titles, so that he just goes over the top.
Yeah.
And the name that Jesus uses for himself is Son of Man. And that's a term that is developed, and its meaning builds over the course of the whole gospel. But its basic meaning is a human being, one who is a representative of humans, of people, a kind of super democrat who represents not just a constituency, he represents all people.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that brings me to the last question, which we've sort of decided we wanted to ask this question of every story. And that is, what are the implications of this story for justice today? And there may be times when there really aren't any. We don't really want to force it, but if you were to look at the story and ask that question, do you see an implication for justice today?
Oh, I do. I think that this story establishes and affirms the foundations of justice, which is relationships of love and trust, faith, confidence. So the violation of the law is the violation of the basic structure of relationships, of right relationships. So justice is about the establishment of right relationships and communal relations between peoples but it's also between individuals. Somebody who commits a crime is violating the love, the relationship that exists between people, and is destroying that relationship. And so part of the implications of justice ministries is reestablishing a right relationship.
Right.
So restorative justice is about restoring a right relationship. Well, this relationship that Jesus establishes between himself, Philip, Nathanael, is symbolic of his commitment to relationships of friendship, of intimacy, of mutual commitment, and of willingness to suffer for the sake of those whom he loves.
Yeah.
So there are profound foundational connections between this story and the basic characteristics of relationships of justice.
Oh, that's thank you, Tom. Yeah, we can certainly be considering that in light of the events of the day, of the week,
Yes.
and coming up.
Yeah. Well,
Right,
and
relationship
that's what's
and trust.
being violated.
Yep.
Are,
Yeah.
are the relationships of trust that are implicit in the Constitution of the United States.
Right. All right. Well, everyone have a good week. Stay
Right.
safe.
Blessings, peace.
Stay close to Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Amen.